Live from your local election headquarters, this is 12 News Now.
12 News is your local election headquarters. Welcome everybody to WPRI.com. I'm Target 12 investigator Tim White, along with my colleague, politics editor Ted Nesi. And Ted, polls have just closed in Rhode Island, or actually they're going to close in 34 seconds
yeah.
as I'm looking at the clock right now. But we are looking at 19 other states that close at 8 o'clock, most in the Northeast. And then there are, including Massachusetts, and 19 other states throughout the country, some 238 electoral votes up for grabs. And before we came into the studio, you and I were watching very closely what was going on down in Florida, particularly, Ted, in Miami-Dade County in the presidential race.
Yeah, and I just have to do the big reveal. If 3, 2, 1... Polls are now closed in Rhode Island and
Officially
Massachusetts.
closed.
It's 8 o'clock, as well as in all those other states, Tim. Yeah, the first headline of the night so far, great news for the fans of President Trump who are watching us tonight. He is doing exceedingly well, I would say, in Miami-Dade, in the Miami area. The Trump campaign has put an enormous amount of effort into driving up his numbers with Cuban Americans down there. You know, the Hispanic vote moves very differently in Florida. It's very complex down there, and he really seems to have made some gains in Florida, and it's looking, New York Times thinks he's running away with it.
Yeah, and we should point out that Florida, most of the polls closed at 7 o'clock. The Panhandle closes at 8 o'clock.
In a very Republican area up there in the Panhandle, so we'd expect more votes net for President Trump when you get to those 8 o'clock numbers coming in out of Florida. But I will say, Tim, for the Biden supporters watching us, something we're starting to pick up in the last half hour or so, a bit stronger of a night so far for Joe Biden in Ohio than was expected, which, of course, it's so early, folks. We want to caveat. We're pretty confident about Florida. Ohio, we need to watch a lot more. But, you know, just because the polls said certain states would be the most competitive, sometimes surprises happen, so we have to watch.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the timeline here. We're going to zoom back into Rhode Island, okay? As you just pointed out over a minute ago, polls closed here in Rhode Island. As results come in, Ted and I are going to bring you those results in the local races here in Rhode Island, and then, of course, across the country. Ted, in Rhode Island, remind people of the timeline because there were so many early and mail-in votes.
Yeah, so what we're expecting is now that the polls have closed at 8 o'clock, and of course, if you know someone in line, text them. They can still vote,
right.
so
Don't
stay
leave
in
the
line,
yes.
if you were in line at 8 o'clock. But as soon as each polling place has closed, they transmit their in-person election day polling place results over to the Board of Elections. Board of Elections expects to post those online fairly shortly. In the next maybe half hour to an hour, I would expect those to come online. But again, that's unusually this year. That's just one slice of the pie. Then you have, we're expecting after 9 o'clock, the early in-person voting, which you might see labeled as emergency in-person voting. That's the older way of describing it.
People went to their town and city halls, cast a vote.
Had an emergency, I can't vote after all on election day. Those votes expected to come in after 9 o'clock. So that will give us a sizable chunk of the vote. And then the mail ballots. They have been processing mail ballots now for days, but they haven't been able to count them yet. Now that it's 8 o'clock, the Board of Elections can start to press tabulate on those machines. Those results we're expecting, according to the Board of Elections, around 11 p.m. tonight. So I would expect, if the Board of Elections can stick to its timeline, we should have some strong sense of where the races have gone in Rhode Island by midnight.
All right, so before we go to the Board of Elections, where our colleague Walt Buteau is, let's just talk about turnout. The highest turnout we saw in Rhode Island was 475,000 votes. That was back in 2008. 2016 almost got there with 470,000 votes. We've smashed that record, right?
Well past it. Before we came on the air, Tim, we were at about 400.
Feel free to grab your computer if you need it.
Yeah, I got to bring my computer. I'll do it when Walt's on. But we were about 480,000 votes, a little higher than that. Again, that was I think a 7 o'clock or so update. So you had another hour of in-person. You have some more mail ballots, etc. So I could see Rhode Island hitting 500,000 votes. Not positive yet, but it's certainly still possible for the state to get there, which is, again, a record.
All right, so why don't we check in with the Board of Elections right now. In Cranston, it is the center of the political universe, and that is where our colleague Walt Buteau is live at the Board of Elections. And Walt, you sent an email to the newsroom before we went on the air a couple of hours ago, and you told the newsroom, you informed the newsroom that the indication is there that you might see the Board of Elections might count all of the mail ballots by 11 o'clock. So we might actually have 100% of them in. Is that what you meant by that?
Well, so not 100% because obviously there are 462 of the remote boxes out there that will be coming in the next 2 days, but almost all of the ballots are expected to be counted very soon, actually. Now, these folks are seasonal hires by the Board of Elections, and what they're doing is they are going into the oath envelopes, which have already been certified. They've already checked the signatures during another part of the process and compared them to other signatures in the database. And what these folks are doing are going into those envelopes and then separating the ballots by town and city. And then as we pan to the right, you can see that in these boxes now, they're placing those ballots in these boxes by, again, town and city. I can see Woonsocket there. I can see some other cities and towns, West Greenwich. And from there, the ballots are brought over to these high-speed scanners. Now, they're not only scanning, they're also counting the ballots. But as Ted said, I believe we will not know that count until starting after 11. But they did add a third high-speed scanner to sort of keep up with it, which is, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, we may never see this many mail-in ballots in Rhode Island ever again. Nearly 160,000, a big chunk of that record is the mail-in ballot. And of course, it's new to a lot of people. There have been, so far, we're told, now this was early on, about 400 of those ballots were said to be deficient for various reasons. Could be a signature issue, could be an ID issue. You're supposed to send a copy of a form of ID. It could also have been another issue, and those voters have an opportunity. They're supposed to get notified, and they have an opportunity to fix those deficiencies and get their vote counted by next Tuesday would be that deadline. So that's what's happening here. The big thing here is mail ballots right now, and of course we're going to move to the front of the building here shortly as the returns start to come in on the monitors. I don't know if you guys remember the Board of Elections, the old Board of Elections on 50 Branch Avenue. It was one warehouse where you could see the monitors and the people doing what these folks are doing here. Now it is separated, a much bigger facility, 86,000 square feet in Cranston, a much newer building. This one was built in '76. That building, I think, was built in the '40s. So they have much more space here, and they have much more to do here, at least for this year. And again, we'll be tracking that all night. For now, we'll send it back to you guys.
All right, well, thank you very much. Real quick, I got to tell you, it's fascinating to me as I look at that video coming in from the Board of Elections. Well, this is a really manual process. The video we often see is the machines feeding the ballots, but one at a time they're going through each of these envelopes, and they also, as you said, they have to check the signatures.
It's a great point. They're checking the signatures manually in another part of the building. That's already been done, but you're right. They are sorting them by hand for the various cities and towns, and they added 44 seasonal employees this year to do that. It is amazing to think that nearly 160,000 mail ballots, 44 people really going through those. Do the math. That's a lot of work for these folks. They've been at it to some degree since last week. October 28th was the first day they started processing those ballots. But I think none of us what the mail ballot process was like, because 4 years ago, last presidential election, there were a total of 40,000 mail ballots and provisional ballots. This year, 4 times that in just mail ballots. So it is a unique election for many ways, especially for these mail ballots and the process of manually checking all those signatures. They were trained by a class that was run by a former FBI agent. That's what we're told. But not only checking those, but then again sorting them, as you see right here, getting them in the right stacks so that they can then be counted.
All right, Walt Buteau, live from the Board of Elections in Cranston. Thank you very much. And we are all ready to call some races here in Rhode Island and in Massachusetts. So let's first go to Massachusetts. Though it says 0% up on the screen, the Associated Press has called for Senator Ed Markey. He is, of course, the incumbent that was challenged by Congressman Joe Kennedy up there. This is not a surprise that he defeated Kevin O'Connor, the Republican up in Massachusetts, but that race is now called just 8 minutes after the polls polls closed there in Massachusetts.
Actually, it was called right at 8 o'clock.
Was it called
we
at
just
8?
didn't have time to get to it yet. Let's look at Rhode Island U.S. Senate as well. Jack Reed, that race has now been called. He has defeated his Republican challenger, Alan Waters, according to the Associated Press. Again, just like with the Markey race, Senator Reed will hit 30 years in the U.S. Senate if he serves out this full term. And also, if the Democrats were to win back control of the Senate tonight, he would become the chairman of the Armed Services Committee.
And we can also call the presidential race in Rhode Island. Let's be very clear about that. And this was expected, of course, that Joe Biden has won Rhode Island and will get the 4 electoral college votes that come out of Rhode Island. That's, of course, 1 for each congressperson and 1 for each U.S. senator in every state. So that is 4 in Rhode Island. And they called that as soon as the polls closed. I'd like to take a look, if we could, at the electoral college votes, where those stand right now, as we're about, almost 10 minutes after some 21 states closed in Rhode Island and, across the country. And here we are, 270 votes needed to win, and Joe Biden is up 85 to President Trump's 55. Again, though, just 6% of states in here. And it's unclear to me, Ted, if Florida is in this mix. It looks like it is not.
I don't think Florida has been called yet. No, I think these are the super safe states, the very blue states like Rhode Island and Massachusetts for Biden, the very red states, probably Kentucky, among others, for Donald Trump. So we wanted to also take it back locally, and let's talk about Cranston, House District 15 out in Cranston. This is, of course, the House seat held by Democratic House Speaker Nicholas Mattiello. He is facing a challenge this year. That's actually the Cranston mayor race, but that's another big race
too,
in Cranston. Yes. That race is the mayoral race. We'll talk about it while they're on screen. Maria Bucci, the Democrat, facing Ken Hopkins, the Republican. They're looking for the chance to succeed outgoing Republican Mayor Alan Fung, who is with Hopkins. We'll hope to get some results in that race before too long now that polls are closed in Rhode Island. But in District 15, which is also in Cranston, Nick Mattiello, the Speaker of the House, facing a challenge from Barbara Ann Fenton Fung. You see them on screen there. And as we've mentioned earlier in the night, very high turnout in District 15, well past, even before the state of Rhode Island had gotten past its 2008 turnout record, District 15 had already gotten past its record. So we're not sure, and many people in Rhode Island politics are wondering, does high turnout help Speaker Mattiello hold on to his seat, or does it help the Republican challenger, Barbara Ann Fenton Fung?
Well, why don't we check in right now with our colleague Steph Machado, who is live right now in Cranston. She is covering the District 15 race there, and she's waiting for all the results to come in, as everybody else across Rhode Island is waiting on those results, because, of course, win or lose, certainly if Speaker Mattiello loses, that will have a seismic effect on the state and state politics in Rhode Island. And Steph Machado right now joins us live. Steph, how's it going there? What's the scene?
Well, I am at Barbara Ann Fenton Fung's party in Cranston at the St. Mary's Feast Society. It's an outdoor party, of course. We're in a pandemic. A few dozen folks here wearing masks. There's hand sanitizer. There's a list to sign up for contact tracing, but obviously a very unusual election night here as they await these results to come in. Speaker Mattiello opted not to have a party this year. They were thinking about perhaps having an outdoor party in a tent like this, but decided it wasn't in the best interest of health and safety. So a bit later tonight, we're going to head over to his headquarters to talk to him about the results. But look, this race has had high turnout, as you said, and it is a big question about whether or not the speaker can fend off for the third time since being Speaker a Republican challenge. He managed to do it in 2016 and 2018, and now Barbara Ann Fenton Fung has presented this challenge to him that he is hoping to retain his seat. He argues that he's the one who can keep the car tax phase out going, who can deliver for Cranston. It's a big deal to have your state rep be the Speaker of the House and wield that power, so that is what the Speaker is hoping for tonight. But Barbara Ann Fenton Fung says it's time for change.
If you could, what is Speaker Mattiello? You said you're at Barbara Ann Fenton Fung's watch party right now. What are the Speaker's plans tonight?
He's going to be, he told me he was going to be taking in the returns just with his, family and close friends. Later tonight, like later, after those mail ballot results are posted online after 11 o'clock, he is going to come to his campaign headquarters on Oaklawn Avenue. We will go over there as well to speak to him about the results, whether he's won, whether he's lost, or whether it's too close to call. But obviously very unusual election night. Normally he would have a big party as well and maybe be declaring victory or conceding by 9-10 o'clock. But this year there are so many mail ballots in this race. There were so many votes in this race with a high turnout, more than 8,000 voters that we know of so far, plus those who dropped off ballots in boxes today, that it seems like we won't know the results until perhaps after that 11 o'clock mail ballot result dump online.
All right, Steph Machado joining us live from Cranston, keeping a close eye on District 15. Before I pivot to the national race, Ted, it might be hard for you to analyze this, but you just heard Steph there, 8,000 votes that we know of in District 15. Really, really high turnout. And it is so interesting that so few people can impact House Speaker, House Speaker race there. But does that give you indication any way of how that race might be going?
Well, and so what I'm doing, folks, I'm not bored with speaking with you on television. I am checking.
Or with me.
Or you, Tim. Well, I do get bored with you sometimes, you know that. But I'm just rechecking the 4 precincts in House District 15 here. And, you see, they are having just very good turnout. You're at almost 80% at Hope Highlands Middle School, one of the key precincts in that area. And so, I've talked to people in Speaker Mattiello's camp tonight. They just don't know. Because that's the funny thing with Speaker Mattiello. He is a Democrat, but he often appeals to Republicans, or at least moderates who lean conservative, right?
And District 15 went for President Trump in 2016.
Yes, you have a district that was fairly Trump-friendly for Rhode Island, at least. Trump won all 4 precincts there. You have a speaker who is a Democrat, but leans a bit conservative. You have a Republican candidate who, on a few issues like guns, is arguably slightly more moderate than Mattiello, and, of course, is part of the first family of Cranston, with Alan Fung still seeming popular. So if it's an anti-incumbent vote, does it go against Mattiello? If a lot of Democrats are coming out for Joe Biden, does it help him? Or are they Democrats who don't like Mattiello? They just don't know. And, of course, that is the kind of thing that makes a campaign nervous.
Right. All right. Let's pivot back to the national race right now. And if the control room can bring up the Electoral College votes, that would be wonderful, because we want to talk a little bit more about Florida and Ohio. Again, Florida polls closed, or most of them, at 7 o'clock, and then Ohio also closed at that time. Ted, what are you hearing out of Florida and Ohio? What are the national outlets saying?
Well, it's interesting. So I've been tracking some of the election analysts I really trust, who know down to the county precinct level what's going on. And, I'd say right now, again, early, but Donald Trump is overperforming in Florida, particularly, as we mentioned earlier, in and around Miami, with that strong Cuban-American population that he's worked hard to build. But then Joe Biden is doing better than expected in Ohio in some areas, improving on Hillary Clinton's margin. Ohio is actually seen as, I think in most places, less gettable for Joe Biden than Florida, but on an election night, you can see the mix of the states move around. Perhaps, they did send Joe Biden to Ohio very late in the campaign the last couple of days. So clearly his campaign saw some opportunity in Ohio, and you might be seeing here why they did that. Though, of course, there was no sign they'd given up on Florida either, and the president had been there.
Weren't the national polls showing Joe Biden up slightly in Florida?
Yes, I think a small, it was close to a toss-up, I would say. It must have been 1 point, but that's how Florida goes. And in fact, if President Trump does manage to win by multiple points, that's actually an impressive achievement in Florida, where you constantly see these swings. I think, what was the stat we read in the Wall Street Journal the other day? There's been 50 million votes for president in Florida in the last couple decades, and it's separated by 18,000 between the Democrats and Republicans. 18,000 out of 50 million. That's a true swing state.
But I guess my point is, if he does take Florida, you and I have talked a lot about this. Polling in 2016 really took it on the chin. Of course, national polling was pretty much right on. The popular vote, it mirrored the popular vote. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by a couple of points. I think polling averaged out to about 3 points, so that's within an acceptable level. But when you look at the, you look at some of the the swing state polls, those were way off. And if that happens again this year, you and I have talked about it, Ted, there could be a reckoning for that industry.
I agree. That said, I think right now, I'd be more nervous as a pollster about the Ohio results than the Florida results. Florida, they've been saying it's tight. I think I saw it tied in a poll just in the last day or two. So, anyone who thought Florida was sewn up for either candidate, wasn't understanding what they were looking at. Ohio, I got to look more closely because it's interesting that seems competitive right now. We'll have to see what that tells us as the night goes on.
All right, I just want your expertise locally as we have about a minute left here in our digital show, Ted. The General Assembly, progressives have been making a very strong push in the General Assembly. What are you going to be looking for tonight to see?
Well, first of all, I'm looking to see if a few of those progressive General Assembly candidates won in districts that aren't super Democratic. So did that create an opening for a Republican who could say, hey, this Democrat is now too far from the left, even if he voted for more moderate Democrats before? Or can they win in those places? I'm thinking of the Portsmouth race. Michelle McGaugh is the Democratic candidate down there. And then, of course, you're looking to see, really it all pales in comparison at the moment to Speaker Mattiello. If the Speaker were to lose, and we have no way to know right now, all we know is there's a lot of votes have been cast in that district, it changes everything at the State House. So that, you got to know that almost before you know what the rest of it is.
All right, we're going to wrap this party up, Ted. 12 News is your local election headquarters. You can count on us for in-depth team coverage of all the big races tonight with expert analysis that you can count on. We'll have live updates every half hour here on 12 News or on 12 News. And, of course, stick with WPRI.com for up-to-the-minute updates. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. Thanks for watching.